aesthetic experience. So please welcome Dr. Kari.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation and for the nice introduction. So, in respect to the topic new music, new perspectives for new music in Germany, I would like to present you today an overview about the main arguments of my book, The Digital Revolution of Music, which was recently published by Schott Music. As you see, the book has a subtitle, A Music Philosophy. And music philosophy is, in my opinion, not an academic discipline. To write a music philosophy only makes sense if the idea or the notion of music is changing. This was the case around 1800 when the genre of the symphony has been established as the leading genre in classical music, which led to the idea of absolute music. And such a turning point occurred some 100 years ago with the first atonal compositions, when the whole genre of new music began to evolve. With a comparable situation of radical change, we are confronted now in the digital age. It is a time of big change because all contexts of music are changing at once. In respect to this polycontextual situation, the specific philosophy style of this book is the style of a polytheory. It develops and combines very different theories which refer to very different contexts of new music and its corresponding theories. The social system of music is changing. There are a lot of new technologies in the field of music available now. There are new economical conditions for the production and distribution of music. There is a good reason to look back at and to reassess music history. The current self-description of new music system as art music doesn't work anymore, and the whole culture in which music is embedded is also going through a dramatic transformation process. In the following lecture, I will present you the individual theories the book is composed of, and most importantly, I will show how these theories are combined, support, and strengthen each other. Music philosophy is, in my book, the convincing combination of these individual theories. First, I will speak about the sociological aspect of new music, specifically in relation to new music technologies. I would like to begin with the question, how can we describe the current transformation of the new music system caused by the digital revolution? For that task, I will use the concept of dispositive from Foucault. We can summarize this idea with three different characteristics. First, Foucault describes a dispositive as a heterogeneous ensemble of elements. He gives us a list of such elements: architectonic facilities, laws, administrative regulations, official decisions, scientific theories, moral or philanthropic doctrines, philosophical ideas, discourses, and institutions. Secondly, a dispositive is not only a collection of such elements, but it is, in Foucaultian terms, defined by the net between them. The third aspect of a dispositive is that it contains spoken as well as unspoken elements. Foucault's idea of the spoken and unspoken elements is important for my theoretical approach. One can allocate the unspoken elements to institutions and the spoken elements to the discourses. The special distinction between institution and discourse is used here as a theoretical tool, meaning first, this difference is real. Technological innovation have a different effect on institutions than on discourses. And secondly, I distinguish discourses from institutions in order to understand better how they influence and shape each other in a dispositive. If you look at the table of contents, you see that the first 12 chapters deal with the institutional elements of the new music dispositive, and the last 8 chapters are about the discursive elements of that system. How does the digital revolution transform new music? The first answer is, it transforms the new music dispositive. But the new technologies don't immediately change the self-description of new music and its system of values. First, the technologies shift social structures in which this kind of art is produced, distributed, and reflected. Only in the result of that transformation can the possibility of certain ideas and concepts of music to be accepted or rejected change. I would now like to present the first step, the institutional transformation of the new music dispositive. Why is new music institutionalized in Western Europe? One needs institutions in order to provide necessary resources to produce and distribute this type of music, this type of art music. There are several institutions, or to be more precise, institutional elements which constitute the new music dispositive. In the 20th century, they bear like columns the weight of the whole new music system. First, there is the academy, where composers, musicians, and conductors can learn special knowledge. All this special knowledge has been, up to now, secret knowledge. One could learn it only in the academy and nowhere else. This situation is changing because now you have more and more open access to all this information. For instance, online tutorials are now available for extended playing techniques and extended notation systems. For the first time in music history, there is a chance to listen to your score before it is performed by the help of virtual orchestras, like the Vienna Symphonic Library. And the point is, without any loss in quality. It is, of course, more difficult to build such a virtual orchestra for the purpose of new music, but I argue it is not impossible. What is exciting is that in new music you can use such virtual orchestras as compositional tools. For that reason, I call this technique not virtual orchestra, but e-player. The word e-player combines the association of a machine and a human, of an electronic playing device like a CD player and a live player. The story of the e-player started when I first met Johannes Kreidler some 4 or 5 years ago, and he demonstrated to me his composition software Goethe, which was linked to a huge database of instrumental samples of an impressively good quality. Here is an example. Therefore, I introduced the notion of the e-player in the book of Claus-Steffen, Johannes Kreidler, and myself, Music, Aesthetic Digitalization, a Controversy. After a while, the composer Thomas Hummel wrote me that he is developing such a program, which I described in the aforementioned book, and he asked me for the permission to use the name e-player for a commercial software. Of course, I agreed. Stephen Takasugi recorded over the years databases of his personal instrumental samples. His work, like Die Klavierübung, is a good example of an e-player composition. I especially like it because of its extraordinary acoustic quality. For Stephen Takasugi, his e-player was a personal compositional tool, and he is definitely ahead of his time. But e-player technology will gain sociological relevance only because such e-player programs will be available for everybody in the future. That's why it is so important that Contandra published last year the first virtual orchestra for new music with its Contandra e-player. The e-player chapter is now part of the Musikphilosophie book. Some composers have already named their compositions e-player pieces. So let's turn to another sociological context. Until now, a composer needed a publishing house to print and distribute his or her work. Today, most composers produce their own scores and CDs at home on a computer. Radio stations have been the main way to broadcast new music, especially in Germany and Austria. In the 20th century, only well-established composers could reach a large audience by radio transmissions. Today, everybody can broadcast his music on YouTube. Last but not least is the all-important New Music Festival as a special place to showcase new music. The digital technologies open new music to other art scenes and to a broader public. Hence, there are many more venues where new music can be performed and exhibited. The new music festivals will stay important as a performance place in the future, but they lose their status as the only place where a composer can start and establish a new music career. What is changing now in the new music system in the midst of the digital revolution? The new technologies generate bypasses to the old institutions. This causes a structural change in the new music system. In short, the strong institutionalized social system transforms into a weak institutionalized social system. The new music system is starting to be organized in a very different way. The single institutional elements could operate more independently in the future, no longer like columns of a building, but rather behaving like building blocks. The old institutions don't disappear, however, they lose their exclusiveness. In every respect, there are technological alternatives available. For example, there are music publishing houses, but also the possibility of self-publishing. There is public radio, but also YouTube. There are the traditional music journals, but also blogs. There are live ensembles, but if there is no money for the production, a composer can at least produce a recording from a virtual orchestra or write an e-player piece. New technology can act either as a substitute or as a supplement for the services once provided solely by the old institutions. The term deinstitutionalization has a double meaning, which is important to understand. The first meaning is the change from a strong institutionalized to a weak institutionalized social system. This is a static perspective on the change currently in progress. The second meaning describes the dynamic process of deinstitutionalization, which is in general the process of the weakening of the institutions. It implies a loss of institutional power. One can describe the difference between strong and weak institutionalized social system by several structural characteristics of both systems. Here's a short list of them. In the past, the institutions have had the control over the exclusion and inclusion of participants. They could define who is a composer and who is not. In a weak institutionalized system, is this no longer the case? A strong institutionalized new music system not only regulates who can be a player, but defines in a hidden way who can become a listener. Today, new music reaches, by the new technologies, many more people in other art and music scenes. A composer in the weak institutionalized system is much more autonomous than a composer in a strong institutionalized system. the new digital technologies provide him almost always with alternatives or substitutions, if he or she are not provided by resources and services of the institutions. In a weak institutionalized system, the number of protagonists is much larger than in a strong institutionalized system. The career pyramid in a strong institutionalized system has a small base with a very steep career ladder. Climbing up was a very slow process, but it was almost impossible to drop out of the system. In the new compositional career structure, one can climb up fairly quickly, but it is hard to maintain the level once it is achieved. One has to constantly reinvent oneself. Some careers can even end after 5 years. Almost everyone in the new music system understood his or her function in the 20th century as being a part of the cultural elite. In the weak institutionalized art system, an anti-elitist attitude will become more common. In the strong institutionalized new music system, the composer first receives a commission and then starts to write. In a weak institutionalized system, the normal case will probably be that composers write their scores first and try to get performances after. The most obvious disadvantage in a weak institutionalized system is a lack of social security. Career paths are no longer sustainable, and for the most participants, the amount of money made by composing is no longer enough to support oneself. In the book, you will find a chapter with the title Cultural Economy, which links the theory about the deinstitutionalization of new music with the economical change in the new music system. In fact, I refer to the long-tail theory of Chris Anderson. The name long-tail theory comes from the exponential curve in a chart with which Anderson works. The curve has a head, a trunk, and a long tail. Let's look at such a curve. You see here the sales of a product in relation to the sales rank of a product. The best sellers are in the head of the curve. Classical retailers like bookstores with physical products have financial pressure to keep only popular products in stock because of high rents, the wages of the salespeople, and so forth. There is a profit threshold. How much profit a particular product needs to make in order to be kept in stock. If you look at Amazon, you have physical products but no stores. These hybrid retailers keep the products in huge storage areas outside of the city and distribute everything by post. The curve grows a trunk. Hybrid retailers can keep many products because the profit threshold is lower. And in the last decade we see an emergence of digital retailers. They have no physical products, no physical storage. They sell digital products like e-books, which one can distribute almost without any cost. In this case, the profit threshold disappears and the curve has a long tail. This means they can sell anything without harming the business of the retailer. So the long tail theory of Chris Anderson describes the change of profit economies in the digital age with bestsellers like Lady Gaga as a top. But the question is, how would we apply this theory to new music? Even the most famous composers will not produce profit, but instead need to be subsidized by the state or a sponsor. The idea is that the new music economy works with negative profits, that means with substitutes. The sales of a product on the y-axis is replaced with the amount of subsidy a composer can acquire for the sum of all his works. The sales rank of the product on the x-axis is replaced by the rank of the composers in the new music economy. The bigger the subsidize he or she can acquire, the bigger the rank. In a strong institutionalized classical new music system, where all pieces are composed for acoustic instruments and have to be performed by an ensemble in a concert hall, only a small number of composers can receive enough resources for a performance for their pieces. So, in other words, there is a huge subsidy threshold. There exists no trunk in this curve because one doesn't have enough performances in order to have an identity as a composer. For the new music scene, composers beyond the subsidy threshold do not exist. The subsidy threshold decreases if composers work in hybrid projects together with artists, dancers, jazz musicians, theater actors, architects, scientists, and so on. They can receive resources from other cultural scenes and need less resources directly from the new music institutions in order to have a career and an identity as a composer. The new music system now can have not only a head, but also a trunk. And in analogy to the digital retailers, we have pure digital music, which doesn't need any institutional support in order to be produced, performed, and distributed. The new music economy curve grows a long, long tail. In the future, we can expect many more new music composers, and even if this doesn't sound very likely, I suggest that in the digital age, new music will become a much larger art scene instead of the exclusive new music scene that we presently experience. The subsidy threshold for digital new music will be quite low. We can observe a general democratization of the so-called high culture arts. The result of this partial economical theory of my music philosophy is that the digital revolution doesn't only transform the profit economy, but also the highly subsidized culture economy of new music in Germany. Here is the question again. How does the digital revolution transform new music? The first part of the answer was, it transforms the institutions and the economical base of the new music dispositive. This was our topic so far. The second part of the argument has to answer the question, how does deinstitutionalization and democratization change the idea and the concept of new music itself? The last 8 chapters of the book deal with this question. Here we are confronted with a very tricky theoretical problem. How is it even possible that an extra musical event, what the digital revolution at first glance is, can change the concept or idea of an autonomous art system? So my proposal is here, the digital revolution works like a catalyst for unresolved problems of the art system itself. But what are the unresolved problems? And here I see a connection to Michael Repann's essay, which acted as an impetus for this conference. And it is important that somebody in power like Michael Repann points out these problems, because only then most of the composers and musicians will accept that the problems really exist. In this article, he made an interesting observation. Composers working within the new music system would not like to be referred to as new music composers anymore. New music is what other people do, is the general attitude. For me, this is the clear indication of an identity problem, or better yet, of an inadequate self-description of the new music system today. What is wrong with it? In the essay you can find a rather harsh description of this problem. A consensus ensues that composition is nothing more than the ability to carry out acquired techniques according to established standards of fabrication. As a result, new music forfeits its claim to the status of art. One can draw the conclusion that the wish of composers to resign from new music has to do with the negative impression that what is going on in the mainstream of new music has more to do with craftsmanship than with contemporary art. And at the end of the essay, Michael Lehmann points in the direction of a solution to the problem. One of the most urgent questions for the genre in the immediate future will be how far the supposedly exotic activity of composition can justify its function in everyday life. But what does it mean? Under which conditions could the exotic activity of composition actually justify its function? The question doesn't concern only music, but art and literature as well. Only in this wider context can one discuss the question: what happened with new music in the 20th century? What are the unresolved problems of new music today which lead to this strange tendency to resign to new music? I would argue that in order to deal with this question, one should have a general theory about the history of modern art. In my book, I use a model of aesthetic modernity, which I published first in the German journal Music and Aesthetic under the title Avant-Garde Today. The text is translated into English. You can find both the original text and the translation on my website. The starting point of this theory is an observation. There is a certain chronology of caesuras in art history. There's classical modernism as the first modern art period. There's avant-garde, which is a reaction to classical modernism. There's a postmodernist art understood, and this art understood itself as an overcoming of avant-garde. And there's contemporary art, which stands more and more in opposition to postmodern art. Where do these caesuras come from? There is some evidence that the modern art in the 20th century was driven by a special logic of reaction, overcoming, or better, by a special logic of negation. New was defined as the negation of the old, but there are only few radical steps of negation which concern the basic elements of art communication, that is, the work, the medium, and the concept. And to the concept of music belongs all kind of information what music in general is and what kind of intention a particular piece of music has. The title of a music piece is, for instance, part of the concept. If we presuppose this general three-component model of art, then we can reconstruct the history of modern art as a process of internal differentiation of work, medium, and concept, as a process of decoupling of these components. I would like to explain this internal differentiation by historical rows of music examples. Let us first look at piano pieces. Usually I play here the examples, but almost everybody in the audience knows them, so please go to my YouTube channel. There you find a lecture in English and one in German with the music clips. So this fantasy impromptu would be an example for classical music where word, medium and concept are firmly bound. The medium of music, which developed in Europe to create musical experiences of beauty and harmony, was the tonal system. The composition is based in this medium of music and realized the concept of absolute music. So the first composition in free atonality was Schoenberg's piano piece Opus 11. The medium of classical music is here rejected with the negation of the tonal system, but the piano piece has an opus number. It is still an artwork. Free atonality is a special music concept. It defines in which way the musical material is organized. This is the explanation why the musical concept is still firmly bound to the work. John Cage 433, this is a piece which negates the artwork. And an artwork I understand with Niklas Luhmann as a combination of forms. In music, a work has to be a combination or a play with acoustical forms. It has to be a composition which is perceivable. Postmodernism is a reaction against the historical avant-garde. It is a negation of the classical medium of music. Philip Glass uses the classical or European medium of music, tonality, but in a broken way, under the concept of minimalism. Therefore, in my model, you see a gap between concept and medium. And the piece is no work in a classical sense. One can call it, as Umberto Eco might, an open artwork. It is totally free for pure subjective or pluralistic interpretation. And my last example is Peter Ablinger Deus Cantando. Here we have a contemporary music piece which has, again, the structure of an artwork. You can understand it as a negation of postmodernism, and that means as a negation of the artwork as a form combination. It is not an open artwork, allowing for free association. Instead, it limits in a very intelligent way a listener's realm of interpretation. So, the same way you can build, for instance, another historical role for string quartets with Franz Schubert in the beginning, Anton Webern as an example of classical modernity, Lachenmann's piece for a radical avant-garde. Wolfgang Briem wrote his third string quartet in reaction to the avant-garde and caused trouble in Darmstadt. And at the end, I would say that a piece, the helicopter string quartet from Stockhausen is an example for a string quartet which has the character of an artwork again. Okay, and of course one can combine different historical roles of different genres in a picture atlas, and I did it in this lecture which you can find on my YouTube channel. So here you see, for instance, a historical role of painting, of poesy, that are sonnets, of string quartets, and of architecture, and here I chose the examples of churches. So it is in a way, it should be an acoustical and an visual and a reading argument that you can perceive the historical caesuras in the art history. So this theory model serves me in my book to show that really the material progress came to an end, that in a way the end, or this idea of material progress, is even a misperception of what was going on in the 20th century of new music, because in a way it was a process of differentiation of medium, work and concept. And this is a building block for my theory, and now I can ask the question, if this historical reconstruction of new music is true, then one can say first that the mainstream of the European new music has been based in classical modernity. Second, that new music defined itself by the principle of extension, extended compositional techniques for a score, and extended playing techniques for acoustic instruments. And third, new was defined always as new material. New music followed the idea of material progress. As you see at the model of aesthetic modernity, the whole idea of material progress has exhausted itself. Nobody can be so innovative and so radical as Lachenmann and Cage. The end of the material progress is the unresolved problem of new music. New music has an identity crisis and is confronted with a vacuum of values, a value vacuum. However, the end of material progress is more or less obvious for the last 20 years, but nothing happened. The natural alternative would be to define the new more on the side of aesthetical content, or I would prefer to say, of aesthetical Gehalt, like in the speaking piano from Peter Adlinger. I suggested in the essay Avant-Garde Today from 2006 a Gehalt aesthetical term. The reason why such a Gehalt aesthetical orientation in the new music system never became a strong option has to do with the traditional idea of art music and the way the strong institutionalized music system supports this idea. The Gehalt aesthetical term becomes only visible now. In fact, it is a consequence of the deinstitutionalization process of the new music scene today. But such a paradigm shift was up until now blocked by the idea of absolute music. If one wants to prove this thesis, one has to analyze the predominant self-description of new music, which I did in the chapter about absolute music and relational music. So usually the idea of absolute music refers to the classical music of the 19th century. The terminus was coined by Richard Wagner, became famous by Eduard Hanslick, and in his book The Beautiful in Music, the subject matter of music was, in his words, sonically moving forms. The idea of music disconnects music from any relation to the world. Even the notion itself blocks any reference to the so-called extra-musical events. But this is not the whole story about absolute music. There is a blind spot and a blind hidden spot within this idea. There is one relation left between music and world. Absolute music is in fact a metaphor for the universe. We could call this abstract relation a metaphysical leftover. The structure of music represents the structure of the world. Or in other words, an absolute idea of the world is reflected by the absolute idea of music. The idea of absolute music refers to classical music, but one can find a similar structural link between music and the world in the new music as well. The only difference is that the structure in music and the structure in the world is defined in a negative way. Therefore, I call the idea of absolute music in the new music system an inverted idea of absolute music. To see this point clearly, the best example would be an analysis of the ideas of Helmut Lachenmann. Here you can see, first, the structure of music is a negation of classical music of the aesthetical apparatus. And second, the structure of the world is negative because the perception apparatus of humans is determined, so Lachenmann, by social structures. You see the analogy to the idea of absolute music, classical music. Also in new music is an absolute idea of the world reflected by the absolute idea of music. The new music system was organized similar to the classical music system. Its main purpose was to provide musicians to the opportunity to play music on acoustic instruments from a score in a concert hall. Insofar, it is not the composer, but the musician who stands in the center of the new music system. Most of the money in the system is spent for musicians. The inverted idea of absolute music fits in a perfect way to the old form of institutionalization. It is an idea for musicians and ensembles, but it is not a contemporary idea of music and art. This institutional structure was the main reason that the problem, what is new in new music after the end of the material progress, became an unresolved hidden internal problem of the new music system. The result is that composers are trying to resign from new music. So today the situation is changing. The digital revolution triggers a paradigm shift in two ways. First, there is much more cheap technology available now which composers can use to write Gehaltsästhetic pieces. The institutions in the new music system have lost their control of access to include and exclude composers by one common idea of music. The result is we have new music which works with extra musical information in terms of video, text, pictures and concepts, and follows already another idea of music. In my definition, it is an idea of relational music, where the relation between music and world is no longer abstract but precise. A specific musical aesthetic is chosen for a specific experience of the world. You can find a special chapter about relational music in my book. I would like to present now this idea of relational music with concrete examples. The examples should help to clarify the idea of what relational music is. In order to analyze the examples, I posed two questions. The first question is, what could the possible ballades be in order to define a piece of music as relational? But first we have to define what a ballade is. I use again the German word because there is no good translation, I think. Within a particular piece of relational music, there remains a form element called a ballade, which resists to become a part of the musical dimension. This element possesses the quality of otherness, or you could say of authority. So I consider something a ballade only if it exists independently from absolute music. The ballades of music are foreign bodies to the music itself. What are the best possible candidates for such ballades? Emotion, language, noise, movement, images, and graphs. The second question is, how do these ballades function in a musical work? I see three main options. The first being material. Ballades can be used to generate new musical material within the old definition of material progress. Second, Gehalt. Ballades can be used to constitute an aesthetical Gehalt. The German concept of Gehalt cannot be precisely translated into English. The Gehalt of an artwork is not the traditional pre-existent content, but rather must be experienced and developed by recipient through the process of interpretation. Ballades can establish, in this second case, a reference to the world.
Harry, can you spell the word, the German word, please?
Relate.
Ballade.
Oh, like relato.
So the point is
L-A-T.
So there's the word relational music, and a relation is a relation. And on both sides of a relation, you have a ballade. And this.
Okay, so these are in English. These are relata, singular relatum. We use the Latin R-E-L-A-T-U-M, plural and A.
So it's ballade.
Yeah, like desideratum, desiderata, relatum, relata.
Relata.
Yep.
Okay.
Something that participates in a relational.
Okay, thank you.
And for Gehalt, maybe attitude.
Yeah, what does Gehalt actually mean?
It is a content which you cannot, which is not given, but you can get it only if you through an interpretation.
So interpretive meaning?
Yes, you have to interpret it. It's not.
So it's the output of it's the output of an interpretive process.
Yes, and it is important because, for instance, in program music, there is content, of course, and the music relates to some content, but it is in a way defined. And I speak about relational music and about a Gehaltsästhetic orientation, and this kind of content you will get only through an active, reflexive process.
Okay, so it's not meaning that obtains from form, but meaning that obtains from interpretive work.
Yes, but of course the material of the interpretation are the acoustical forms too. So, and the third point is redefinition. That means that the notion of music is put into question. So say please again to me.
I mean, relatum is this word.
Relatum.
Relatum.
Relatum. Okay, I will speak it in German. Relatum.
It's not widely used in English either.
So that's why I thought I used the German word, and that means that. So redefinition is the third point. That means that the notion of music is put into question. Ballades have here a historical function which is not always apparent. Taboos are broken in order to redefine what a musical work can be, and old norms are challenged in order to transcend the boundaries of what is defined as music. I start my row of examples with the most difficult case, music concrete. The question is, when is a noise from everyday life a relate of music, and when is it not? This is a rare case of Musik concrete. Usually the external references of everyday noise is neutralized by the composition process to a large extent. But Schaffer has had to record the train noises and to produce the piece with records, and haven't had the means to edit and mix the sounds like today. That's why the acoustical train sounds keep their identity and are clearly identifiable through the whole piece. The function of this ballade is to create a new music material to work with. The whole genre of instrumental theater is relational music. Here are some scenes from Maurizio Kage's Staatstheater. Sound refers directly to the movement or an action which one can perceive as its source. In the logic of the new music system of the 1970s, this fusion of movement and sound was perceived as a new aesthetical material. The natural movement of pumping is, for instance, transformed into an absurd musical rhythm. The second function of these ballades were to redefine the current notion of music. It was a form of institutional critique, nonsense on the stage of high culture. In the next clip of Carola Bauchold, the singer mentions four hand-working tools: Schraubenzieher, screwdriver, Schleifstein, sharpening stone, Kneifzange, pincers, and axe. As you can hear, the tools are not only pronounced as words by the singer, The music imitates the tools in two different ways. First, Bauchold imitates within the time structure the movement of the tool and the resultant periodicity which occurs. For example, the blow of an axe or the regular movement of a sharpening stone. Second, the sound of the tool is imitated by extended instrumental playing techniques. The function of this kind of relats is to create a new musical aesthetical material. One could call it a sound action. A new aesthetic experience is considered as a positive value within the new music system. However, this poor counting of handworking tools is not adequate to create an aesthetical Gehalt. What Bauchold does accomplish here is an ironic usage of Lehmannian extended techniques. The piece Falsche Freizeit from Hannes Seidel and Daniel Kötter has to do with the same topic like the previous piece, in fact with the use of tools. You don't see actors but for retirees on the stage which pursue their hobbies. But you see the actual tools. The whole working process occurs as the source of noise. The composition is primary and superposition of the recorded noises on the stage. But even if there happens to be a strong looping and distortion of the original noise, the relats of music don't disappear. The working noise are always visually present for the recipient. The musical relats here fulfill all three functions. They create new musical material, especially by the use of the video screens. They redefine and extend the notion of new music, and they have strong Gehaltsästhetical implications. Because you have really the impression that it's a little bit terrifying, like these pensioners spend their lifetime. That it is impressive. One type of relat are emotions. Music can refer to feelings which one can clearly identify in a piece.
Die treffen nicht. Ich glaube, es ist sehr wichtig.
What is amazing and astonishing with this piece of Raya Chernovin is that it evokes an aesthetical Gehalt without any language. By primarily referring to emotional states like anxiety, loneliness, distraction, sadness, or madness. On the one hand, you can recognize these emotions by the facial expression and the gesture of the singers. On the other hand, the music mimics these feelings by such means like breathless breathing, screaming or bubbling, and by the extended techniques in the orchestral material. In this framework, the trauma of the Holocaust has presence on the stage without being explicit. In order to refine the term of relational music, I want to discuss 3 borderline cases where one could easily assume that a piece is relational, but actually it is not. Sometimes even pieces like Helmut Lachenmann's Zwei Gefühle, which include language, are not automatically relational music pieces. The pivotal question is how language is used in the composition.
Rührend nicht das wenn du der mich es noch wind mit seinen Zwiebeln.
In this piece, language is decomposed into its elements. Syllables are interchanged, left out, or have been stressed in an unnatural way. This deconstruction of language makes it impossible to understand Leonardo da Vinci's text. You can perceive only single fragments of a word. The result is that language works like sound material without external references to the world. The Ballade language deintegrates. It becomes unstable and loses its authority in this particular composition of Lachenmann. Therefore, Zwei Gefühle is not an example of relational music, but represents new music following the inverted idea of absolute music. In the 19th century, the idea of program music emerged in opposition to the idea of absolute music. One can see program music as an historical predecessor to relational music, but neither is relational music program music, nor is program music an example for relational music. Let's listen to one of the most famous examples of program music, to Richard Strauss, Also sprach Zarathustra. What is the immediate experience of such a performance? You see the conductor and the orchestra in a concert hall, and you listen to classical music. The only difference of this experience to that of absolute music is the background information that Strauss' movement titles refer to 9 chapters of Nietzsche's book Also sprach Zarathustra. But you don't read the text while listening to the music. The supposed ballade is not present. Only if one could presuppose that Nietzsche's book was common knowledge of the educated upper class of the 19th century could one argue that this kind of program music works like a piece of relational music. Maybe this was the case 100 years ago in Western Europe, but this assumption is definitely wrong in the multicultural, highly individualized postmodern society of the 21st century. And now, in contrast to Zarathustra, we have charts music. Johannes Breitler musicalized the stock market charts of the financial crisis of 2008. For that purpose, he used the composition software Songsmith for hobby composers. Graphs, charts, or schemes can be used as musical ballades as well. They represent abstract correlations to the world and are especially interesting for new music composers because one can immediately use them as a draft for pitches, harmonies, rhythms, and melody lines. Schott's music is relational music. I would call it ready-made music, and as real ready-made of Duchamp's, it works against the aesthetical expectations. In this case, it is against the aesthetical expectation of the strong institutionalized new music system. Not every composition based on a graph or is graphically composed becomes automatically a piece of relational music. Here's Earl Brown's December 1952. Usually, one listens to these pieces without seeing the graphic score. Insofar, it is a piece of absolute music. Today, more and more new music is received by the audience together with its notation on websites like YouTube. But even this visual image doesn't transform Brown's piece into relational music. Any notation lacks the authority to be a ballad of music. Only graphs like electrocardiograms, seismographs, or charts of stock prices have the potential to be true ballads of music if they are explicitly exposed by the composer and meant to be perceived as a part of the listening experience. Here's a musical example in which I personally participated in. The American composer Lehmann asked me to write a PowerPoint presentation about a political topic I am interested in. The lecture was filmed, cut into video sequences, and these video clips have been integrated in the score. My topic of the lecture was how natural catastrophes can change worldviews. I examined 3 cases: the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, the earthquake in Lisbon, and the tsunami of Fukushima.
Das Problem entsteht, weil Gott auf der einen Seite 2 absolute Prädikate zugesprochen werden. Gott ist allmächtig und Gott ist allgütig. Es gibt 3 Strategien, mit dem Theodizee-Problem umzugehen. Die erste ist, das Problem wird invisibilisiert. Man hat es mit einer Situation zu tun, in welcher der logische Widerspruch einfach nicht sichtbar wird. Doch wie ist dies möglich? Damit Katastrophen für Weltbilder.
Lehmann's PowerPoint composition is an extreme case because the musical ballad is theory. The composition follows the timing of the philosophical argument, but Lehmann did not set the theory to music. The music develops its own Gehaltsästhetik. The argument becomes part of an aesthetic experience. The genre of a PowerPoint presentation concert certainly has an aspect of redefinition of new music, but the Gehaltsästhetical aspect is, of course, more important here. My last example of relational music is the piece Generation Kill from Stefan Prinz. The musical ballad in this piece are the projected images of performing musicians on the screens which partially overlap with the image of the live playing musicians behind. At least in the moment when these sound images are manipulated, sped up and slowed down by joystick, they are not only a representation of musicians in a concert, but the sound images represent a new aesthetical material. In addition to this, the inclusion of the black and white sequences of drone attacks transform the relational music into a Gehaltsaesthetic piece. The whole setup of composition with 4 video screens, 4 musicians and the 4 performers at the joystick is technologically advanced and extends the notion of what a new music piece is, insofar the musical ballads have a redefining function to cross the borderline of what was considered contemporary new music. This aspect, which in my mind was crucial for the historic avant-garde, becomes less and less important today. I think that the particular function of redefining new music will not be relevant anymore in the future. Therefore, I have crossed out this function of redefinition within my overall scheme for now. In order to extend the notion of new music, one needs borderlines to cross and limitations to overcome. But the boundaries of genres are more and more unstable in the digital age, when one can compose with all kinds of media on the computer and the multimedia perception of music possibly will become the common listening experience. What we can see in the digital age is a remarkable caesura in new music, which is caused by a change of its dispositive and by a process of the institutionalization of the new music scene. If you look at the notion of music, then we see a shift from an idea of absolute music toward an idea of relational music. If you look at the normative orientation of the music system, then we can observe a Gehaltsaesthetical turn. It would be quite natural if you, as a listener of my lecture, wonder whether this paradigm shift is really so dramatic as I presented here. Why should new music suddenly change its self-description so radically? And why should this happen just now? In order to make a big argument convincing, one should make the context of the argumentation even bigger, considering this is a possibility, of course. My last theory in the polytheory refers to the general cultural context of new music. I use in my music philosophy an argument with which the German sociologist Dirk Becker developed in his book Studies About the Next Society. Becker makes a distinction between 4 types of society in relationship to the dominant medium of communication. First, we have oral societies. Secondly, writing societies start to appear, which means that the medium of writing evolves. This, of course, doesn't eliminate language communication. Writing is an emergent phenomenon. Thirdly, Becker speaks from a book printing society, which starts with Gutenberg's invention of the printing press with movable type around 1450. In this case, printing is an emergence phenomenon of the writing culture, which then led to a total other form of communication and hence society. And finally, today we have reached the end of the book printing society because of the emergence of computer-based communication. Because it is too early to see what type of society will develop with this new medium of communication, Dirk Becker calls it the next society. In my music philosophy, I used this general model to draw an analogy to music. You can find exactly the same caesuras in the European music history as you could in the general human history. First, there was an oral music culture in form of the Gregorian chants. Then there was a writing music culture, which started with the invention of the 4-line stuff by Guido from Arezzo. In analogy to the invention of the printing press, there developed the possibility to print sheet music, and today the digital revolution is changing the whole music culture. So you find this table in my book. I make there the distinction between an oral, literate, and a digital music culture. A clear sign of a new music culture is that in all dimensions of music, one can find new emergent phenomena. In the long run, the primary media of composition will no longer be notation, but the medium of samples. And the primary modus of composition probably will not be writing a score, but rather editing music in the media of samples. In all these cases, composing in a notation system doesn't disappear, but loses its primary status as first method of dissemination of the musical idea. I imagine this emergence of a new music culture in the same way like the invention of computer-based communication would change the whole society, but of course doesn't put to an end the oral and written communication in a digital age. I'm at the end of my journey through the music philosophy, which has the theory design of a polytheory. The book combines the description of newest 21st century technological innovations in new music with a sociological theory of deinstitutionalization. In addition, the book shows the transformation of the cultural economy of the new music system. I argue that these economical and sociological changes collide with an internal problem of new music, the end of material progress, and this end of material progress becomes evident in the context of my theory model of aesthetic modernity, which reconstructs the music history of the last century. Furthermore, the book draws the conclusion that these developments altogether will lead to another self-description of new music toward an idea of relational music and a Gehaltsästhetic term. And finally, the book embeds the digital revolution of music in a general cultural change that takes place in the digital age. Thank you very much for your attention.